Hi, welcome to another edition of This Issue. My guest this time is Leslie Manning from Bath. Leslie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Bruce, and I want to wish you a peaceful 2015.
Thank you. Same to you, and same to all the people viewing the show as well. Why don't you start out by telling us a bit about yourself?
Well, as you know, I live in Bath, and I'm a member of the Religious Society of Friends, known as the Quakers. I serve on the Friends Committee for Maine Public Policy, and I also serve on the Public Policy Committee of the Maine Council of Churches. And I'm active, as are many who are Quakers and not Quakers, with Friends Committee on National Legislation, the Quaker-based lobbying group in Washington.
All right. Well, let's review some of the recent election results and how these impact our future on issues that we're all concerned about. Let's start in Washington, D.C. Susan Collins was reelected. What difference do you think she and our other Senator Angus King make in the U.S. Senate?
Well, we've had the opportunity to meet with both senators and their staff members, and we're encouraged by what we hear from them about out-of-control Pentagon spending. Senator Collins is in a unique position. She's very good friends with Senator John McCain, who's the incoming chair of the Armed Services Committee, and Senator Collins herself sits on the Senate Appropriations Committee. Senator King sits on the Senate Budget Committee, and both of them, of course, serve on the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. And they are the primary reasons, many think, that the summary on the CIA torture report was released, that they were able to build out from the center and reach people on both sides of the aisle to get that torture report summary released. So I'm encouraged. I also think that we're in a good position with Representative Pingree, who of course sits on House Appropriations. And if we take incoming Congressman Bruce Poliquin at his word, which I do, he's very concerned with the debt and of course excess spending in government, areas of waste, fraud, and corruption. So I think Maine is singularly positioned to build from the center and to work with folks on both sides of the aisle who are looking at out-of-control spending in Washington.
All right. Just a couple days after taping this show, you will be speaking at a unity rally in Augusta. What are you going to talk about at that event?
Well, I think my concerns are shared by many people across the state. We at the Maine Council of Churches believe that budgets are moral documents and that they reflect both our highest aspirations for who we are as a community and also the stark realities of this so-called economic recovery. What we're seeing, of course, is wage stagnation since the 70s and the people at the top getting wealthier at the expense of the rest of us. And we think the real concerns that we hold as a community are how do we care for those who are, in Christ's words, the least among us.
And what about the governor? He's not been real receptive on issues of Medicare expansion and or is it Medicaid expansion? I forgot which one of those two it is. But anyway, you know what I'm saying here.
Well, health care for all is one of the highest priorities of the faith community in Maine. And we have worked long and hard at the national and at the state level to continue to try to achieve it. It's my expectation, based on conversations that I'm having with people in Augusta, that healthcare is going to be in the mix one way or the other. It has to be. The hospitals and providers want it. It makes good economic sense for the state. Even Republican lawmakers and governors who have opposed accepting the federal dollars are seeing benefits to it in their red states. So it's not a question of if, it's a question of when.
Why do the hospitals want to see this change made?
It's to their best interest, because right now, when people who do not have any form of coverage go to a hospital for care, they usually show up at the urgent or emergency level when the costs to the hospital are the greatest, and the hospitals have to put it under their charity care, and we've seen that rate significantly go up since almost 70,000 Mainers have been left without health care.
And how much money, basically, are we talking about that so far the governor has refused to accept from the federal government to care for these 70,000 Mainers?
I've seen varying figures, Bruce, but I think one of the things that is key to this discussion is one of the foci both in Augusta and Washington is job creation. And if there was adequate coverage for the Mainers in this state who need it, we would in fact be creating jobs, the hospitals would be seeing increased revenues, and we would have a healthier and more stable population. I think the key here is not just what we save, but what we create with the investment in healthcare jobs. When you take money and put it into the community in the form of jobs in education, healthcare, infrastructure, we see immediate results, unlike, for example, jobs that go into defense contracting.
Let's talk about that. Why should we care about having an economy in Maine that is not so reliant on military production? And maybe start the answer with just how reliant are we in Maine today?
Well, I don't know if you saw a recent story in the Bangor Daily News, but it's something that they do regularly. And they look at the amount of money that Mainers spend in federal taxes and the return that they get on that investment. And in this state, the return is almost 5 to 1. So for every dollar that we spend in federal taxes in Maine, we see that money coming back into our community. And a large percentage of it, almost 10% of Maine's gross domestic product, comes back in the form of defense contracts. Now, let's give you a sense of the scale of the defense budget. And actually, I've got to start over, because I'm not sure we're talking about defense. I think what we're talking about is war. We are a war-based economy. We converted after World War II, and we've never really backed away from that. And over 50 years ago, General then-President Eisenhower warned us about the effects of becoming so dependent upon the military. He called it the military-industrial complex, and Senator McCain now calls it the military-industrial congressional complex. It's a web that is almost unimaginable, but on average, the Pentagon spends about $600 billion a year. They have 1.4 million people employed in uniform, another roughly 700,000 who are civilian employees of the War Department, and in addition to that, 700,000 full-time contractors. So we're talking about almost 3 million people directly benefiting from the employment by the Pentagon. But really what we have is a web. The military itself will tell you that they're operating at roughly over 24% of capacity.
What does that mean?
Well, that basically means that they have too many bases and too many costs associated with maintaining those bases. They have more of the things that they don't want and need, and less of the things that they say will make them more effective at their basic job, which is defense. Much of that is the fault of Congress members. Congress has, in effect, refused to come up with an effective budgeting system for years, and we see the effect of that in sequestration. Now, we could have a long discussion about how Congress has abdicated its responsibility, and I don't want to take Congress off of the hook. But you know, for most of us, this is about we, the citizens, we, the people, holding our elected leaders accountable. Our job doesn't end on Election Day. Our job actually begins on Election Day, and we have to be in regular dialogue with our elected representatives to make sure that they hear our concerns about the Defense Department or the War Department being responsible for almost 60% of the federal budget.
We have somewhere between 800 to 1,000 bases. I've seen figures within that range around the world. Why? Why so many bases around the world?
Because nobody wants to be in the position of cutting bases, because nobody wants it done in their district. That's why we depoliticized this problem ostensibly by creating the Base Closure Commission, which is supposed to refrain from politics and make its decisions based purely on the economic and strategic needs of the department.
Well, what about the bases overseas, though? Why does the United States have so many bases around the world?
Well,
in a lot of these places, people are clamoring. Okinawa, Korea, Italy, Sicily. I mean, you know, all over the world, people are clamoring for the U.S. bases to leave, get out of our country.
Because we have invested in empire at the expense of sustainability and community. The short answer is that we are in a position where we have to put our own health care, our own education system, the future of our children aside and pay for empire. And that's what we're doing right now.
And so, in other words, we're subsidizing corporate empire, correct?
I would,
because doesn't it really benefit the corporations, the resource extraction corporations, the weapons corporations?
Absolutely. Who benefits when the status quo is maintained, when there is no oversight, when there is no clear direction? Who benefits? The people who are lined up right now at the trough, pulling as much pork out of the system as possible. Let's look at the budgets that just was passed. It was full of benefits to large corporations. The Democrats and the Republicans were responsible for major corporate giveaways in the last budget. And everybody shrugged their shoulders and said, well, the only way we could get a continuing resolution is if we gave the corporate masters what they wanted. I don't think that's acceptable. I think the majority of American people, regardless of party affiliation, don't feel that that is acceptable. And I think we're poised at a place and at a point where we can start to demand from our elected leaders the kind of oversight for our budget that we feel is needed here.
Lately, I've been reading in various publications that the Navy is saying that their shipbuilding budget is unsustainable. They're more than $75 billion short on projected shipbuilding costs. The new aircraft carriers are over budget. The
submarines, the missile systems that go on these vessels. Here we have
wait a minute, I want to finish. Yes, submarines are over budget, and the Trident nuclear missiles that go inside of those submarines cost more than $50 billion. They don't have the money for those. The destroyers at Bath Iron Works cost $1.5 billion each, but the new Zumwalt, the new version destroyers, are costing more than $4 billion each. So where is all this money going to come from to pay for this unsustainable budget?
Well, it's debt. The very debt that Representative Poliquin says he wants to address. We are, in effect, borrowing money from China to build weapons to protect ourselves against China. The United States Defense Department budget is the largest in the world and is, in fact, larger than the other 8 highest nations, including China and Russia combined. There's no need for it. If you talk honestly with military personnel and budget analysts, they'll say it's rampant runaway spending. It's out of control. The Pentagon has never been audited. It's due to be audited in 2017, and we have assurances from both of our senators that they're going to see that that happens. But what happens when, for example, the Government Accountability Office goes in and does a review of these very programs, these weapons programs, and they find cost overruns in the billions of dollars? Who's on the hook for that? The American taxpayer. And an analysis of who actually pays taxes shows that middle-class Americans pay 84% of federal taxes. That means you and me. And just like when you are living on a budget, You can't go beyond your means unless you get into significant trouble with debt. We are in significant trouble with debt in this country, while the corporations continue to make billions of dollars at taxpayer expense.
The coming Unity rally in Augusta, just a few days from this taping, is being organized by a group called the Alliance for the Common Good. What is your vision of the common good?
I want to see a world where peace is not only possible, but that peace prevails. I want to see a world in which children learn peacemaking and conflict transformation skills from the earliest grades. I want to see a world where we don't sanction violence as the automatic response to conflict and to disagreement. That's big. That's long term. I think short term, I want to see a state that reflects the values truly of Maine's people, where people are encouraged to prosper, where small businesses and coastal communities especially can flourish. And I want to see a state where we accept responsibility for those among us who are too elderly, too young, or too disabled to be in the workforce. We have in Maine a wonderful work ethic, and we have some of the most creative and resourceful workers and business owners in the country. I think we need to support them because they are the basis of our economy. But we also have people who are unable, through no fault of their own, to be able to fully participate in our economy. And we have a moral, an ethical, and I would say a legal responsibility to care for them.
In the last election, Governor LePage, one of his top issues that seemed to put him back into office was quote-unquote welfare reform. A lot of people in this state feel like, you know, that there's a lot of people that are getting benefits of some kind that are abusing them. How do you respond to that claim and that emotion that is out there?
Well, I think it's fear-based. I think that all of us are but one paycheck away, or for many of us, we are afraid that somebody is getting something that we feel that we are entitled to. And we saw a lot of that being played out in this last election. But I think the other piece of this that is very legitimate is there are people taking advantage of this system, and they are corporations. Since this country says that corporations are people, I think the biggest welfare problem we have in this country is corporate welfare. And if the people who are going to Augusta and the people who are going to Washington will spend as much time scrutinizing trade practices and labor practices and environmental practices of corporations as they do looking for fraud that heretofore has not been proven to exist, but is purely anecdotal, then I think the entire country will be well served. That's where we need to put our energy and our direction as we move forward in Washington and as we move forward in Augusta.
Good answer. Very good answer. Very impressive answer. The 15 new incoming Republican senators in Washington, D.C. have pledged to eliminate the food stamp program. How does that serve the common good? To basically just throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, we're shutting this down. What does that suggest there?
Well, it suggests two things to me. One is our responsibility is to educate them. We are their employers. They work for us. We need to make very clear to the people whom we elect, who are on our payroll, what their job expectations are. That's the first answer. The second answer is, I bet none of them come from states where agriculture is a major commodity. Because if they were to talk to the farmers in those states, if they were to talk to the small grocers and independent business people in those states, if they would talk to the people who run the convenience stores where so many of us gather for coffee in the morning, they would understand how essential it is, how essential this program is. You can hold up one example of food stamps. Think about Ronald Reagan and his welfare mom imagery, and that becomes the lie. And if you repeat the lie over and over and over again, people tend to see it as the truth because they keep hearing it. The lie is not that we have hungry people in this country. We, the wealthiest empire in the history of the world, are not taking adequate care of our people, of our homeless veterans, of our mentally and emotionally disabled people. We're not doing our job, and because we're not doing our job, we want to blame them for their own situation. That's immoral, and it's unethical, it's unfair, and it's wrong, and it needs to stop. And it's our job to call people out for that. Let's try education. Let's try sitting down with people with whom we disagree and saying, these are the reasons I believe in what we have to offer in this country. And then if we can't convince them, then to work to get them turned out of office. But let's not accept that that it's a moral judgment of God because somebody is poor. That is faulty theology, and it's bad public policy.
My sense of the reason why so many people are on food stamps and so many people are hurting and unemployed is because, look at the evidence. Millions and millions of jobs have been moved out of this country by corporations to places like China and India and other, increasingly Vietnam. In fact, jobs are being moved from China because the workers are unionizing in China, and they're moving them to Vietnam where they can pay them even less. And so this, when you add it up, is why we have legions and legions of people across this country that are unemployed and in need of these programs.
The economic recovery, so-called, is not working for the average person. It's working for those who have the millions and billions to invest in corporatization and plutocracy. That's the situation right now. It's analogous to what we saw at the end of the 19th century with the robber barons. And out of the people, out of, in fact, the Republican Party in the 19th century, we saw a cry for reform and progressive politics that served all the people. We've got to draw our hope from our history. This country, from its inception, has been wanted to be ruled by a small band of elite. Look at Robert Morris and Alexander Hamilton, who wanted to create a system that would reward only the bankers and refuse to pay the veterans the money that the government had promised them. From our inception, we have fought this battle, and we have consistently won that battle because the people have gotten engaged in this struggle. That's what we need now. This is, in fact, a call to restoring the government of the people, by the people, for the people, that we know this nation to be.
So at a time when we have this corporate arterial blockage of the body politic, of our congressional, of our Congress, of many of our state legislatures, really under the control of these corporations, the arteries of life, blood, to our heart are weak because of this corporate blockage. How do we practically change that?
Well, in your medical analogy, we can do prevention before we do surgery. So I would submit that we have to do both. If it's that bad, we put stents in. If it's that bad, the people take the legal system into their own hands. We are, in Maine, looking at the possibility of lawmakers making themselves irrelevant. If they don't get a handle on the needs of this state fairly soon, we see groups, progressive groups and other groups, talking about going to direct referendum. That the issues of public policy are, in fact, sometimes too large, too momentous, and too important to leave to politicians. So we see a real movement in this state towards taking things directly to the people in the form of referendum. So there's one possibility, that's surgery. But the other is really, before we get there, to really sit down and cultivate in Augusta and in Washington an atmosphere where being able to speak truth to power is not only expected, it's encouraged. We need politicians who will say, this line item in the budget is nothing but pork. and it's clogging our arteries. It needs to come out. I think, realistically, we have in our elected representatives some people who have the capability to do that, people who have the integrity to do that. And what they lack is the public support to go out and do it. So my appeal to your viewers and to people who really care about the priorities of this country is to put insistent, consistent demands on our employees, our elected representatives, to do the right thing for the greatest number of people, not just for the wealthy elite.
So I guess in the end, the real question is, will we turn against each other during these difficult times that we face right now? Or will we turn to one another and work in cooperation and community?
I have to believe that we will work with each other. We will disagree. We need to disagree. We will have different approaches to solving problems. That's creative. That's good. The last thing that can happen, the worst thing that can happen, is if people become frozen by apathy and turn away. That's what the plutocrats are counting on. If we make this process so distasteful, so harsh, so ugly that the average decent person turns away from it, then they will have won. They will have succeeded, because we will not be taking responsibility for our own democracy. And the bones of democracy will be fed on by these jackals.
It could be apathy, or it could be discouragement and outright depression and disgust. Many people have pulled away. But let me ask you this final question. We only have about a minute or so left. What gives you hope to continue this work?
The people that I meet every day. The people who care about their families and their community. And as a historian, I look back and see what we did with abolition. A small, vocal group of people said, owning other human beings is wrong, and we need to do something about it. Public sentiment was against them. Political power was against them. Economic priorities were different, and yet they succeeded.
You're talking about abolition of slavery.
I'm talking about abolition of slavery. And in this country, the way it happened is people just dedicated their lives to doing the right thing. And because they did, the right thing was eventually done by people who didn't want to do it, but they knew it was the right thing for the right reason. I think we can draw on many lessons of our history that show that when people engage fully in the process gets better for all of the people.
Well, Leslie Manning, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Bruce.
And thank you for your important work and your appeals to the morality and to the heart. I think it's really very important.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching another edition of This Issue. Until next time, good luck to you all, and please get organized.